Stephen Hawking once stated that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. And over the past several decades, climate change has been a topic of discussion within the oil and gas industry. As a student pursuing petroleum engineering, I am focused on energy production and the energy safety protocols regarding climate change. I believe that climate change is one of the biggest threats to our world, and big oil companies have unbalanced the scales between energy production and energy programs within the scope of climate change. Misinformation from these companies has created distrust with environmental communities, but through unity, we can establish a system to combat the issue at hand. Big oil companies have unbalanced the scales between energy production and safe energy practices regarding climate change. In 2021, while traveling to San Antonio for winter vacation, I noticed a large portion of the sky was covered in smog. I'd only ever seen smog in California, but I soon realized that Houston, Texas is one of the biggest oil cities in the state. And I also wondered if that smog was due to other sources like transportation. Later, a report came out by the University of Houston that petrochemical plants were pumping excess amounts of pollution into the air during the winter storm. The issue with climate change is not only seen within the data, but is also seen with our very eyes. We need to stay informed and take the correct action to continue the fight against this issue. And in recent years, there has been great debate about the amount of regulation placed on the oil and gas industry. Over the past several decades, there have been several bills put into place with the overwhelming evidence of climate change. And here you can see the relationship between oil production through the decades and the specific bills implemented within those decades. Within the last several years, there has been less restriction and there has been an all-time high oil production. During President Trump's time in office, he implemented huge strategies to boost the oil and gas economy. And one of those strategies was the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement. Matt McGrath of BBC News stated that without a doubt, President Trump's withdrawal from the agreement will make it more difficult for the world to reach the goals it set for itself within the Paris Agreement. The United States contributes about 15% of global emissions of carbon, and is also a significant source of finance and technology for developing countries in their efforts to combating temperature rising. With less accountability for these companies, they are reluctant to change the protocols regarding harmful greenhouse gas emissions. But the issue doesn't only stem from the industry, it also comes from the amount of regulations placed on these companies. And although we see a continued fight against climate change, these companies have to take on the responsibility of relaying honest data to continue the fight against climate change. The oil and gas industry has not been distributing accurate data in relation to oil production and the emissions that it is producing. And this has created a gap to potential solutions. You see, statistics can sometimes be misleading. When I first joined the Marine Corps, my drill instructors presented a slideshow just like this, and there was one statistic on there that really stood out to me. And it read that 70% of Marine Corps marriages end in divorce. This statistic stood out to me because I was about to get married the following year. But instead of focusing on going to counseling or doing the correct steps to have a successful marriage, they just said, don't get married, which didn't make any sense to me. Instead of fixing the problem, they just masked it with false statistics and false protocols. Although an increase in regulation would decrease the overall production of emissions, the inaccurate data reduces the effectiveness of the solutions put into place. Al Gore said that the shocking underreporting of emissions is a big problem when tackling the climate crisis. The reality is that a large portion of this industry shy away from any restrictions because it directly affects the economy within that specific sector. Climate Trace, a project to measure at source true levels of carbon dioxide and other global heating greenhouse gases, published a report saying that half of 50 of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions were oil and gas facilities. Even with companies planning on going net zero, the issue lies within the data that is being distributed by this industry. And companies like BP, Total, Shell, and Repsol are on the right track, but these aren't the biggest companies in the market. Corporations like Saudi Arabia Aramco and China Petroleum and Chemical have yet to mention any programs in reducing overall emissions. So we have a lack of responsibility on top of a lack of accountability, and it has created a valley between the problem and the solution. So how do we fix it? By uniting environmental communities and the oil and gas industry to seamlessly combat climate change. And by doing this, we create a checks and balances system, and we force this industry to abide by regulations and to continue the fight against climate change. The lack of communication and involvement between these two industries is simply not enough. Being united, we can be stronger than ever against climate change. Even with the implementation of programs like the GGRP by EPA and the Oil Production Greenhouse Gas Estimator, it still doesn't deter companies from submitting inaccurate data. I believe that through Unity, we can appoint a surveyor and significantly reduce the potential of false information, as well as collectively establish new techniques and technology to further reduce the number of emissions. Although many companies have already came up with a protocol to reduce emissions, this has not yet been adopted by a majority of the industry. Some of these protocols have to do with eliminating methane leaks, flaring and venting, scale up carbon capture usage and storage development and deployment, switch fuel and improve energy and efficiency of operations, utilize low carbon feedstocks to offer low carbon products, collaborate across the supply chain, and build capacities to measure emissions granularly. Just as many organizations that utilize the checks and balances system, the oil industry and the environmental community will work together to seamlessly battle climate change. Now, with the oil industry unbalancing the scales between energy production and safe energy practices, it has impacted climate change significantly. The distrust created between these two industries because of inaccurate data has also created a problem with getting to the solution. I believe by uniting these two industries through cooperation and innovation, we can further combat the issue of climate change. I believe that it is crucial to the well-being of society and the world to stay informed on the topic of climate change regarding energy. And I believe together we can continue the fight against this issue and create new techniques and technologies to further the progression of the battle against climate change. With unity, we can begin to fill the gap between climate change and the required solutions to combat it. Thank you.